Okay, I think we're live, and good morning to everyone from Cyprus. I know it's afternoon already in Australia. Some other people may be watching from elsewhere in the world, so welcome everyone, no matter in which time zone you find yourself in. We're in for a very interesting presentation by Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides. Klearchos is an assistant professor and the deputy head of the School of Law in the Cyprus campus of UCLan, the University of Central Lancashire. He will be presenting today on the role of the Greeks of Cyprus in the Greek Revolution of 1821. And this is quite an appropriate date to do so, exactly because it is 2 days after the commemoration of the slaughtering of the Greek clergy in Cyprus by the Turks in 1821. So it's not only the 200 years anniversary of the Greek Revolution itself, but it's the 200 years anniversary of the death of Archiepiscopos Kyprianos, who came to be the symbol of the resistance of Greeks of Cyprus against the Ottoman Empire in 1821, and he remains a symbol of resistance and of dignity, I think, for Greeks everywhere. So, Klearchos, the floor is yours. You'll be presenting your thoughts on this for about half an hour, maybe 35 minutes. We will make sure that to stop you if you surpass that time, so we give time to the audience to pose any questions or share any thoughts with us on what will be said. So here you go.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm honoured to be addressing you all today. I thank both Agora Dialogue and the Cyprus Community of Canberra for the invitation extended to me. I'm particularly honoured to be addressing members of the diaspora in Canberra and other parts of Australia. I too am a child of the diaspora. On the one hand, I was born in England and spent the first 45 years of my life in that northwest European country. But more recently, since 2015, I've effectively belonged to the British diaspora in the Republic of Cyprus. So I've got ties to diasporas at both ends of the continent of Europe. Now, I've today been asked to speak about the Greeks of Cyprus and their role in the Greek Revolution, which began a little over 200 years ago on the 25th of March, 1821. Bearing in mind the extraordinary and deeply intertwined ties that currently bind both the Republic of Cyprus and Australia to the United Kingdom, I thought I would begin by sharing with you some remarks of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, the heir to Queen Elizabeth II, the latter of whom is the head of state of the United Kingdom, the head of state of Australia, and head of the Commonwealth. In a speech delivered at what was called the Greece Bicentenary Dinner in the presidential mansion in Athens on the 24th of March 2021, a day before the centenary, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, referred to Greece as the birthplace of the Duke of Edinburgh, his then ailing father, who was born in Corfu on the 10th of June 1921, and who was originally known as Prince Philip of Greece. Evidently mindful of Prince Philip, who was to die on the 9th of April 2021 at the age of 99, Prince Charles articulated the following sentiments that I'd like to bring to your attention. And I quote, "In feeling a profound connection to Greece, her landscapes, her history, and her culture, I am hardly alone. There is something of her essence in all of us. As the wellspring of Western civilization, Greece's spirit runs through our societies and our democracies. Without her, that is to say Greece, our laws, our art, our way of life would never have flourished as they have." It was because of this, perhaps, that Lord Byron's 1812 poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, in which he first championed the cause of Greek self-determination, struck such a chord with European audiences. The Greek struggle came to be seen not as the concern of a foreign people, but as our common cause. As Byron's friend Percy Shelley declared in the preface to his poem Hellas, we are all Greeks. Now, having referred to the cause of Greek self-determination, as he put it, Prince Charles then turned his mind to a different type of determination. I quote once again, "Had it not been for the determination of the Greek people to fight on in the face of terrible suffering and against overwhelming odds, independence could never have been won. For these and for other reasons," and I'm now stepping away from the remarks of Prince Charles, "for these and for other reasons, a truncated Kingdom of Greece was eventually established on the 30th of August 1832. I've chosen my words carefully. On the 30th of August 1832, Greece did not achieve full independence. That's because of a number of factors. One factor is because its independence was curtailed, and not least by international arrangements such as the Treaty of Arrangement entered into in Constantinople on the 21st of July 1832 by Turkey, and what effectively became the three protecting powers of Greece, namely the United Kingdom, France and Russia. Greece actually wasn't a party to that treaty. The independence of Greece was also constrained by a related fact. Greece, or the Kingdom of Greece upon its establishment, was saddled with an unelected and somewhat autocratic Austrian-born king, Otto von Wittelsbach, if I pronounced that correctly. Otto was the second son of the King of Bavaria, what is now present-day Germany. Otto arrived in his new homeland on the 6th of February 1833, by which time he was aged only 17, with an entourage of advisors from Bavaria who were effectively pulling the strings, especially early on. In phases over the next 115 years or so, culminating in the incorporation of the Dodecanese Islands into the sovereign territory of Greece, the Kingdom of Greece gradually expanded to encompass the territory that forms part of the Hellenic Republic today. And that territory does not encompass any part of the island of Cyprus, which, for various reasons I'm not going to go into today, was established as a semi-independent sovereign state in 1960. So that's all by way of general introductory history to how the Greek Revolution of 1821 eventually gave rise to the establishment of the Kingdom of Greece in 1832 and the arrival of an unelected king in 1833. Now, against that sort of general background, let me make 5 specific points about Ottoman history as a further backdrop to the contribution of the Greeks of Cyprus to the revolution. It's very important to understand this Ottoman backdrop because it helps to explain why there was a revolution in the first place, and secondly, why that revolution had a knock-on effect in the then Ottoman-ruled island of Cyprus. 5 points. The first point is that the Ottoman-Turkish conquest of what had previously been ancient Greece and thereafter the Byzantine Empire was not completed until the blood-soaked capture of the city of Constantinople in 1453. What followed was the blood-soaked conquest of Cyprus, with the spilling of much blood originally in Nicosia upon its capture on the 8th of September 1570, and then there was the further spillage of blood upon the conquest of Famagusta in 1571, which completed the Ottoman conquest of the island of Cyprus. So Ottoman expansionism was accompanied by the spilling of much blood, and it would appear from the sources available to us, the rape of women, the Islamization of Greek and other Christian churches. The second point I want to make is that across Cyprus and the wider Eastern Mediterranean during the long epoch of Ottoman Turkish rule, Ottoman governance was characterized by corruption, cruelty, and cold-heartedness. And that helps to explain why there was such revulsion against the Ottomans in 1821 in both what is now Greece and what is now the Republic of Cyprus. There was revulsion at this corruption, cruelty, and cold-heartedness. Ottoman Turkish rule was also characterized by what amounted to normalized inhumanity inflicted on a mass scale with appalling consequences at complete odds with the basic principles that we all take for granted today if we live in a democracy. I refer to freedom under the law, fairness, justice, the rule of law, and so on. Normalized Ottoman Turkish inhumanity was symbolized by the prevalence of slavery, the slave trade, the systematic sexual exploitation of females via the mechanism of oppression known as the harem, and the forcible castration of males who thereby became eunuchs, guarding each harem and performing certain other duties. The third point I want to make is that across Cyprus, what is now Greece, and the Eastern Mediterranean, the Ottoman Turkish authorities did not regard any follower of the Greek Orthodox faith as a citizen endowed with freedoms and rights in the way that we today, if we're privileged to live in a democracy, are citizens endowed with freedoms and rights. Instead, the Ottoman Turkish authorities regarded a Greek as being a subject of the Sultan, a non-Muslim member of the Greek Orthodox Christian millet, i.e. religious community, somebody who was under the thumb of the semi-autonomous Greek Orthodox Church, which the Ottoman authorities exploited to try and keep the Christians under a form of control. A Greek female fared even worse, as she was treated as being subordinate to all males, be they Muslim or non-Muslim. And in this context, this is absolutely important to understand why the revolution happened. The Ottoman Turks not only regarded Greeks as gavurs, which is a derogatory Persian term meaning non-Muslims, unbelievers or infidels. The Ottoman Turks regarded the Greeks as rayaz, which is a derogatory Turkish word, I understand, meaning cattle. The Oxford English Dictionary goes further by helpfully defining the word raya as a subject of the Ottoman Empire, especially a non-Muslim who is not a member of the ruling class and is therefore liable to pay a poll tax. And by contrast, a Muslim was not normally liable to pay any such tax. And this contrast not only underlines the discrimination meted out to non-Muslims, it also illustrates the segregation that was cemented into Eastern Mediterranean society. And that's a segregation that we still see played out today with the consent of the United Nations, the consent of the European Union, and the consent of virtually every government around the world. They're tolerating this systematic, deep-rooted segregation of Muslims and non-Muslims in the island of Cyprus. They just changed the labels. That's a story for another day. But the point I want to make is that this is a key point that explains why the revolution happened. The fourth point that helps explain why the revolution happened is that after conquering what had previously been Greek-ruled, or in the case of Cyprus, Venetian-ruled lands, the Ottoman Turkish conquerors began upon a program of colonization, de-Christianization, and Islamization. It wasn't complete, but it was partial. And the visual examples of this include the forcible conversion of Hagia Sophia Cathedral in Constantinople after 1453, the forcible conversion of Hagia Sophia Cathedral in Nicosia after 1571, and the forcible conversion of St. Nicholas Cathedral in Famagusta shortly after 1571. They were converted forcibly from Christian places of worship into mosques. And that again helps to provide part of the backdrop to the revolution of 1821. The fifth and final point I want to make in order to try and account for why the revolution happened. There were other factors, but I'm just going to focus on these five for the purpose of today. The fifth explanation is that the Greek Revolution of 1821 began in the aftermath of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, both of which were epochs of history characterized by renewed European and non-European interest in the artistic, cultural, and intellectual contributions of the ancient Greeks to what has come to be known as Western civilization, to use the phrase adopted by Prince Charles in his speech on the 24th of March 2021. By the same token, this is critical. The Greek Revolution of 1821 occurred in the aftermath of the American Revolution of 1776 and the French Revolution of 1789. Both of those revolutions, I'm referring here to the American and the French revolutions, both of those revolutions had been animated by ancient Greek ideas such as democracy, the rule of law, equality before the law, and liberty under the law, all of which, of course, were conspicuous by their absence from Cyprus and other Eastern Mediterranean places which were ruled or misruled by the Ottoman Turkish authorities. And to illustrate my point, I can do little better than quote from the proclamation issued on the 24th of March 2021 by President Joseph Biden, the current US president and a lawyer by profession. This is what President Biden said. That is to say, US, our founding fathers drew inspiration from ancient Greece's example as they framed our constitution and formed the world's first modern democracy. This bicentennial reminds Americans and Greeks alike of the enduring strength of the principles that sparked our respective revolutions and the values that uphold our democracies. And those values include, I would suggest, humanity, respect for the rule of law, respect for the rights and freedoms of others, self-respect, and perhaps most importantly of all, justice. With all that in mind, I reach the following tentative conclusion. It's possible to argue that the Greek Revolution was a just war that was compliant with the just war theory articulated by St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas in the previous centuries. Let me now, with that background in mind, turn to the Greeks of Cyprus and their contribution and role in the Greek Revolution of 1821. At the outset, let me stress that partly due to the geographical detachment of the island of Cyprus from the mainland of what later became the Kingdom of Greece, coupled with the geographical...
Yeah, of course, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's something wrong with the transmission. So people can't actually hear what you're saying. Sorry to be so rudely interrupting you while you're in the middle of a very interesting presentation. But we need to wait a little bit just to get the connection established.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
As far as I can see, my connection's okay, but these things happen.
It's something wrong with, it has nothing to do with your connection. Something is wrong with the broadcast in the Hellenic Club. So
I'll pause in that case and
yes, let's just pause. Okay, it is restored. So now you can, if you can just start from a little bit, just a couple of sentences before the point that I stopped you, and I do apologize for interrupting.
Okay, thank you. I understand we've had an internet connection and it's being restored. So what I did a little bit earlier on was I sketched out 5 of the reasons why it is possible to argue that the Greek Revolution constitutes a just war in line with the just war theory articulated by St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas in the centuries before the Greek Revolution. And with that background in mind, I'm now going to turn to the role of the Greeks of Cyprus in the Greek Revolution of 1821. I've deliberately not used the phrase Greek Cypriots for reasons I'll come to in a moment or two. I've deliberately chosen that phrase, the Greeks of Cyprus. At the outset of this part of the presentation, let me stress that partly due to the geographical detachment of the island of Cyprus from the mainland of what became the Kingdom of Greece, and partly because of the sheer geographical distance between the two, Cyprus did not become one of the military or paramilitary epicenters of the Greek Revolution upon its commencement on the 25th of March, 1821. However, there are other reasons beyond geography as to why Cyprus didn't form part of that military or paramilitary campaign against the Ottoman Turks. For example, as the eminent academic John A. Koukkides has observed, well before the revolution began, the Archbishop of Cyprus, the Autocephalous Greek Orthodox Christian Archbishop of Cyprus, Kyriakides, was firmly of the view, and I'm quoting here, that an uprising in Cyprus would result in the certain slaughter of the Greek inhabitants of the island. So that's another of the reasons why there was no mass upsurge in Cyprus as there was in parts of what became the Kingdom of Greece. Now, with all that being said, the Greeks of Cyprus did nonetheless play a role, at least, not least as the provider of moral support for the Greek cause, as the provider of personnel in support of Greek paramilitary units, and as the provider of supplies of one form or another. As Professor Petros Papapoliviou has written in the official Cyprus government website that has been created for the purpose of marking the contribution. I'll just read to you the website address. It's Kypros, Kypros 1821, all one word, Kypros1821.gov.cy. And Professor Papapoliviou has given a number of excellent lectures online, which I encourage everybody to try and find on YouTube. But the point he makes is that Cypriots were active in various fields of conflict during the Greek Revolution, and these included Messaloniki, the Peloponnese, Crete, the siege of Athens, and a number of naval operations. So there was indeed a contribution made at a military or paramilitary level. Papapoliviou estimates the number to be approximately 500, but it's very difficult to pin down the exact numbers for reasons that he has explained to us. One reason is because there hasn't been yet an exhaustive archival investigation into the role of the Greeks of Cyprus. What I will do at this point, however, is read to you what the current president of the Republic of Cyprus, Nikos Anastasiadis, said in a message delivered in English at, I quote, the event organized in New York by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America to commemorate the bicentennial anniversary of the Greek Revolution of 1821. This constitutes official presidential recognition of that contribution. This is what President Anastasiadis said. Taking this opportunity, please allow me to commend the small but highly symbolic role of Cyprus, which at the time, he's referring here to 1821 to 1832 or thereabouts, also suffered from the Ottoman Turkish oppression in support of our Greek brothers. More than 1,000, that's the estimate he's put, more than 1,000 Greek Cypriots, as he called them, heroically fought alongside the Greeks, whilst thousands strongly supported the cause, secretly providing much needed supplies and aid. This led to severe repressive measures and the execution of many of our compatriots by the Ottomans, one of whom was the religious leader of the Greek Orthodox, the Cypriot Orthodox Church, Archbishop Kyriakides. Now, in response to what President Anastasiadis said, I must offer some comments.
It seems now again we have a technical issue, and this time is on the side of Cyprus. Klearchos' connection doesn't seem to be that good. So let's just wait a little bit, see if we can get him back. Okay, we're trying for Klearchos to reconnect. Just on just one point, in case anyone is interested, if anyone has the chance, a new play has just come out, and it's called Meres Mekhri tin Enati, the days leading up to the 9th of July, the day of the death of Archbishop Kyprianos. And it's a very interesting historical play I'm not so sure if it's gonna reach Australia, but if you happen to be in Cyprus in September, when they're gonna have some more shows coming up, it's an excellent play. I mean, as a historian, I really like the fact that it was very true to the information we have as part of history. So, Klearchos, again, the floor is yours. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, you were saying something. You were mentioning what President Anastasiadis was saying in his speech, and I was just made an intervention, and I might as well tell you there's a play about Archbishop Kyprianos which has just come out, Meres Mehri την Ενάτη, which I basically highly recommend to anyone who has the chance to see it. And I will tell you a little bit more about it after you're done, of course, with your presentation. So here you go again. Hope we don't have any more troubles.
Thank you. Thank you for holding the fort whilst the computer froze on me. Yes, in response to what President Anastasiadis said, I want to make a couple or two or three very important points. Firstly, the terminology he used was the colonial terminology that has been absorbed by everybody. He used the phrase Greek Cypriots. It's the phrase that the British popularized alongside the phrase Turkish Cypriots during the 1950s in order to serve the purposes of divide and rule and segregation. These phrases were not prevalent in Cyprus, though. If you read British legislation that was enacted in either London or Nicosia during the early to middle British colonial epoch, they would the British repeatedly refer to Muslims and non-Muslims or variations of those terms. So the President Anastasiadis was using the terminology of today to look back to the Ottoman past. But I now want to focus on Archbishop Kyprianos and the others who suffered. In his statement, President Anastasiadis quite rightly referred to severe oppressive measures, but he didn't go one step further and actually tell the people what those severe repressive measures were. And we see this actually with quite a few official statements on 1821. Far too many politicians and diplomats will refer to 1821. They'll use the phrase Ottomans, but they won't go any further and actually tell the public what actually happened. And this is my purpose in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I want to explain to you what actually happened in reprisal, for that's what it was to all intents and purposes, on the part of the Ottoman Turkish authorities. I don't blame the Turkish people, but I do blame the Ottoman Turkish authorities and the post-1923 Turkish Republican state that is in a state of denial as to what has happened. So let me turn to Sir Harry Luke, who was the commissioner in Famagusta during the early British epoch. He wrote a book called Cyprus Under the Turks, 1571-1878, a record based on the archives of the English consulate in Cyprus under the Levant Company and after, and drawing upon the records of the English consulate in Cyprus during the Ottoman epoch and upon contemporary records and memoirs. Sir Harry Luke explains to us what happened. And we have to treat all this with a pinch of salt because we don't yet have a full access to the Ottoman Turkish archives. And even if we do have access to them, we have to treat what they say with a pinch of salt. Anyway, this is what Sir Harry Luke wrote in his classic book, which was published by Oxford University Press in 1921. The Greeks of Cyprus, he explained, had remained entirely aloof from the national movement which had stirred other islands in the Greek mainland. Now, he said that as a prelude to referring to what Küçük Mehmed, the then Ottoman Turkish governor of Cyprus, did. He, according to Sir Harry Luke, invented a plot and persuaded the Grand Vizier, that's the chief political officer in Ottoman Turkey, of its reality or its alleged reality. The Grand Vizier went along with this, according to Sir Harry Luke, and then Sir Harry Luke proceeded to lay bare certain details that President Anastasiadis chose to avoid when he spoke on the 25th of March 2021. So let me quote to you what Sir Harry Luke wrote. The Grand Vizier, being perhaps a party to the stratagem, allowed the governor, that's to say Küçük Mehmed, to make an example by the severe punishment of the leaders in Cyprus. free to act, Küçük Mehmed, on the 9th of July 1821, 200 years ago, a couple of days ago, Küçük Mehmed ordered the arrest of the Archbishop Kyriakides and 3 other bishops, i.e. the Bishop Chrysanthos of Paphos, Lavrentios of Gerinia, and Meletios of Gideon. They were taken to the Serai Square in Nicosia and were scarcely inside before they were murdered by the Janissaries. If you read Turkish sources, you'll say they were just hung as if they had been subjected to a fair trial and that a sentence had been imposed, and the sentence was execution by hanging. Sir Harry Luke doesn't beat about the bush. He calls these murders. The method of murder applied to the Archbishop was public hanging. The method of murder applied to the 3 bishops was beheading, i.e. Decapitation, which was a favoured technique of the Ottomans, and others, of course, during that epoch. On the 23rd of April 1821, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople, Gregory V, met the same deadly fate as Archbishop Kyriakides. He had been hung. So there was a pattern of assaults perpetrated by the Ottoman Turkish authorities against senior clergymen across the Ottoman Empire. So what happened in Cyprus was not in any way out of kilter with other assaults on the clergy. I want to just make a point here, a key point. In common with so many other people, these clergymen were victims of what would today be described as a stitch-up or a frame-up, followed by an extrajudicial execution amounting to state-sanctioned murder, in the absence of any fair trial, in the absence of any legal representation, and in the absence of any right of appeal. We take these things for granted today, but these people were living in an epoch where none of these things we take for granted existed. They were subject to the whim of the Ottoman Turkish authorities that were operating without any separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, and were operating by diktat. What happened next? Well, Sir Harry Luke offers the following details. The Greek notables of Cyprus, who were summoned later, before the news of the slaughter of the prelates had spread, met the same fate. The gates of the palace in Nicosia were then opened and the bleeding corpses were thrown into the square. This was the signal for a general massacre. For example, as part of this operation, the convent of Phaneromeni in Nicosia was at once occupied and the priests strangled. These acts, which bordered on the bestial, were said to have been followed by atrocities, rapes, acts of discrimination, and other indignities. I'll just give you 2 or 3 more quotes. One is from Sir Harry Luke. The Greek houses were given over to pillage, massacres began again in all the districts of the island, and confiscation followed massacre. So this is important. We saw this played out in 1453 after the conquest of Constantinople. We saw it played out in 1821. We've seen it on de facto basis in the Republic of Cyprus in 1974. We saw it, of course, in Asia Minor and the Pontus areas of Turkey during the Greek-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922. Massacre is followed by the arbitrary confiscation of property and the pillage of those properties and various other indignities inflicted upon the unfortunate people to have been on the receiving end of this. And this is why we have the rule of law and justice and equality before the law today, because those sacred principles are the means of preventing any such outrages from happening. And if they do happen, they're the means by which a measure of justice, both civil and in many cases criminal justice, can be delivered in the aftermath. None of those principles were applicable here. I'll just read to you, I'm very conscious of the time and I'm going to wrap up in 3 or 4 minutes. I would like to quote to you what the French consul in France said at the time, Monsieur Méchan. This is in Exerta Cypria as quoted by Professor Koukkides. In the aftermath of these massacres, the consul of France wrote, in only a few days, over that dreadful summer of 1821, the Archbishop of Cyprus, the bishops, the high-ranking Greek priests, the merchants, the notables of the cities and villages, and finally all rich or influential people had been slaughtered, beheaded, or hanged, their properties confiscated, and their families enslaved. We tend to focus on the deaths, but we must never forget that in the Ottoman Turkish epoch, many of the survivors ended up becoming slaves because the Ottoman Turks operated both the slave trade and the evil known as slavery. Another key point, why were these people targeted? They were targeted because they were ethnic Greeks, or more likely because they were adherents of the Greek Orthodox Christian faith. They were targeted because of their ethnic or religious background. This makes the attack on them all the more sinister and all the more morally depraved. But in contemporary terms, we would call these acts of persecution, and which is an aggravated form of an act of discrimination. And this is, let me just pause here, this is what afflicts the Eastern Mediterranean today. Far too many people are victims of inhumane conduct of one form or another because of what their ethnicity or religion happens to be. We've seen it in Turkey with the Kurds, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in other parts of the Eastern Mediterranean. So that the phenomenon that I'm describing to you here from 1821 is regrettably still being played out in far too many parts of the Eastern Mediterranean today. And another, I'm looking at the time, I will wrap up. I just want to refer you to the massacre in the island of Chios in 1822. And this was perhaps the most appalling of all of the massacres that took place during the Greek Revolution. Now, in Kyriakides, the Archbishop in Cyprus, he felt that if the Cypriots rose up against the Turks, there would be a general slaughter in the island. Now, there was a slaughter, but it wasn't as widespread as the one in Chios. Now, I can't find any precise figure because the various estimates have been bandied around. A very conservative estimate is that 30,000 people in the island of Chios were massacred. Other estimates provide higher figures. In addition to those who were killed, many other islanders from Chios were enslaved or suffered in other ways. And we must never forget, with all of our preoccupation on Cyprus today, that the suffering inflicted on Cyprus in 1821 formed part of a much bigger picture of inhumanity, which in a sense justified why the Greek Revolution happened, because the Eastern Mediterranean was subject to a tyranny that was administered by the Ottoman Turkish authorities. I thought I would just close with something that caught my attention on the 28th of May 2021. The Federal Foreign Minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, struck a deal with the government of Namibia. The deal boiled down to this: the government of Germany acknowledged that a previous government of Germany, the one that presided over the period 1904 to 1908, was responsible for what would today be described, as he put it, genocide in Namibia. I want to just read to you what the Foreign Minister of Germany said. And I want to ask a couple of questions. Should the government of the Republic of Cyprus demand that the government of Turkey issues a similar statement? Should the government of the Republic of Cyprus do what the government of Namibia has done and demand not only an apology, but the payment of reparations for the suffering that was inflicted in 1821 and during the wider Ottoman epoch? And the third question I'll ask is whether the government of Greece should do as I'm recommending, which is to demand reparations, an apology, and other remedies. So let me read to you, and I'm going to close with this. Let me read to you with what the Federal Foreign Minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, said on the 28th of May 2021. Our aim was and remains to find a shared path towards genuine reconciliation in memory of the victims. This includes being unreserved and unflinching in naming the events of the German colonial period in what is now Namibia, and in particular the atrocities between 1904 and 1908. We that is to say the German state. We will now officially call these events what they are from today's perspective, a genocide. Given Germany's historical and moral responsibility, we will ask Namibia and the descendants of the victims for forgiveness. As a gesture of recognition of the immeasurable suffering inflicted on the victims, we want to support Namibia and the victims' descendants with a substantial program to the tune of €1.1 billion for the reconstruction and development. The communities affected by the genocide will play a key role in shaping and implementing this program. Legal claims for compensation cannot be derived from it, he added. Meaningful, and this is the point I want to read to you because this has echoes of the Eastern Mediterranean. Meaningful reconciliation cannot be decreed from above. It is beyond doubt that the crimes committed during German colonial rule have long been a burden on our relations with Namibia. The past cannot be put to rest. However, recognizing our guilt and offering an apology is an important step to come to terms with the crimes of the past and to shape the future together. I look forward to the day when Turkey will conduct itself in a similarly dignified way as Germany has done, so that a measure of justice may be provided to the descendants of the Greek Orthodox Christians, as well as the Armenian Orthodox Christians, Assyrian Orthodox Christians, and others who fell victim to the inhumanity for which Turkey is unquestionably responsible with respect to the Ottoman epoch, and of course beyond the Ottoman epoch. In the meantime, and I close with this comment, let us spare a thought for all those who suffered for one reason or another during the long years of Ottoman Turkish rule in Cyprus and elsewhere. Let us pay tribute to those who rose up against their oppressors so that Greeks might be free. Let us recall the blood shed by those who were massacred in the ferocious backlash against the Greek Revolution that began on the 25th of March, 1821. And let us never forget all those who laid down their lives in the noble cause of freedom. Ionia imnimi. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Klearchos, for a very informative but also touching presentation of some historical truths, which, as you say, become sanitized by the politicians for reasons that we can all figure for ourselves. Hate to be pessimistic here, but there's a great difference between the Turkish state and the German state. Germany is a democracy, and its existence as a state is embedded on the democratic principles and the rule of law that you've already described as a necessary prerequisite for any society to flourish today. So, I mean, Turkey is backsliding. I've just seen the latest report by Stanford University by Larry Diamond, who was published in Foreign Affairs. And Diamond makes a very clear case that Turkey is no longer a democracy. He doesn't consider Turkey to be a democratic state when he's categorizing the partners and allies of the United States. So I think the hopes are very slim there. The chances are very slim that we ever get an apology from Turkey, especially as we seem to be relieving the last chapter of the Eastern question in the Eastern Mediterranean. I think that the dilemma, the conundrum of who gets the spoils of the Ottoman Empire in the area is a question which seems to be alive. And I think that the most important variable in this equation now is that, the once sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, has risen from his deathbed, and he's claiming what the Turks rightfully think is theirs. I mean, we had the statements by the Turkish vice president the other day that the Greeks of Cyprus, which is the correct term, and I'm glad you brought it up, are the invaders on the island, which belongs to the Turks. So as we would say in Cyprus, Fonazio kleftis για να φύγει ο νοικοκύρης, but this is what we're having to deal with. And before I open the floor to any questions or comments or thoughts by the audience, I must say that we have the first comment, which is congratulations for your presentation, which one of the viewers thinks is an excellent presentation, and I obviously agree with that. Let's see if we've got any questions from the audience in Canberra, or any questions or comments from the people who are watching this seminar online. Okay, I don't seem to have anything registered now, but I'd like to make a comment and go back to the play that I was referring to, because I thought it was an excellent depiction of not what was happening only 200 years ago in Cyprus, but what is happening now. And that's why I felt my stomach turn when I was, I sat there in that in the Municipal Theatre of Strovolos, and I was watching that play. And I know that Antis Zahariadou, who wrote it, she happens to be my friend. I know she went into the archives and did a lot of historical research. And again, it's the same thing. I mean, and you use the word stratagem. They came up with a stratagem to get rid of the Greek clergy on the island. And are we not still the victims of similar stratagems that we now call narratives? And the Turkish narratives seem to be all over the place nowadays. I think we get very few opportunities to present our case as Cypriot citizens demanding justice and freedom and equality before the law. I think most of the cases we're just hitting a wall. I mean, our arguments seem to be non-existent for some of our partners and friends in the international system. So it was heartbreaking to see that that the history of Cyprus gets to repeat itself. And what worries me the most, and I'd like your comment on that, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. Why are we allowing history to repeat itself on the island? I mean, we are dealing with Turkey, which hasn't seemed to change much since the Ottoman times. We are in for these stratagems that, the Turks always seem to be the victims of some injustice that we've inflicted on them. I'm not saying that there were not mistakes made by the Greeks on Cyprus in the early years of the Republic. But what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think that Turkey is, gets away with murder, basically, and pun intended, in Cyprus? And why do the Greeks of Cyprus actually allow this to keep going on? Because I think there's some responsibility on our side as well.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. I'd like to answer it in a way that links back to your earlier observations about the difference between Germany and Turkey. So let me go to Germany first of all in answer to your question, because what we've seen here are two models of international responsiveness. The first model is the response to Germany during the Second World War and more especially in 1945 and what followed. And the second model of international responsiveness or non-responsiveness is in relation to Turkey, particularly, I would suggest, since 1955 and the pogrom in Istanbul, as the Greeks call it, Constantinople. In the German case, Germany was responsible for invading and occupying one country after another during the First and the Second World War. And there was a military backlash and the liberation of Europe during large parts of Europe during the Second World War, the price, though, of putting some of those countries into the hands of the Soviet form of tyranny. But what happened in Germany, I've written down here 4 major developments which are missing in the Turkish case study. The first is that in 1945, the great powers, including the Soviet Union, has to be said, established the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal and the follow-up trials in the second wave of the Nuremberg trials. And what those trials did was they delivered international criminal justice. But beyond that, they forced the German people to face the facts that they had been led for 12 years by a tyranny responsible for the worst forms of inhumanity, for one aggression after another, for one form of exploitation and colonization after another. And as a consequence of that, the German people faced a decision. Do we want to go back to Nazism, or do we want to face a democratic future? They chose, thankfully, the second of those options. And this brings me to the second major difference. In the German model, there was a concerted program of denazification coupled with democratization. And the Nazism, not fully, but it was by and large ripped out of the system. The Nazi state was decapitated from the top. So the leaders, Hermann Göring, Hess, Speer, all of those people were removed from the scene, imprisoned in the case of Speer and Hess, executed in the case of Göring and others. Although Göring, of course, committed suicide before he was hung. But the Nazi leadership was decapitated. They kept the rest of the German body in place, and they democratized Germany. Thirdly, the Germans themselves created a constitutional culture built around the concept of human dignity. It's right at the core of the German constitution. And they don't just refer to human dignity and pay lip service to it. They built their constitutional culture and legal system around the principle of dignity. But fourthly, and crucially, the Germans had a leader of the stature of Konrad Adenauer, a lawyer by profession, an experienced politician who made mistakes, but he steered Germany away from Nazism and towards the economic and political powerhouse of today that makes mistakes, that is responsible for hypocrisy, selling military items to Turkey and all the rest of it. But nobody can accuse the Germany of today of being the Nazi tyranny of the past. Now let's look at those four concepts and apply them to Turkey. There's been no delivery of international criminal justice. There's been no Nuremberg-style or Hague-style international criminal tribunal established to prosecute those responsible in Turkey for the crime of aggression, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and possibly, arguably, genocide. There's been a culture of impunity laid down in the Eastern Mediterranean for the benefit of Turkey. We haven't seen democratization in Turkey. The European Union have pumped in billions of euros into supposed democratization projects. Where has that money gone, and why has it not resulted in democratization? It's actually resulted in the returnable or an enhanced form of authoritarianism in Turkey. Human dignity, if you look at the official statistics of the European Court of Human Rights since 1959, these are in the official court records. Turkey vies with Russia for having the worst record at the European Court of Human Rights. And in terms of judgments handed down establishing at least one violation of the European Court of Human Rights, Turkey has the worst record of all of the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. So human dignity is not being honored in Turkey. And that means that the Turkish people are suffering, and the people that come into contact with Turkey, such as the people of Cyprus, are suffering. And instead of having a Konrad Adenauer type figure steering Turkey towards democracy, Turkey has had Mr. Erdogan, who's been prime minister or president since 2003. He's reaching the 20th anniversary of his rise to power. So whichever way you look at it, the Turkish model points in the direction of tyranny and oppression and injustice and impunity, and the German model, thankfully, points in a different direction. Now, who's to blame for this? And to go back to your question, well, clearly the great powers on the world stage are partly, if not mainly, responsible for this, because they've chosen the path of appeasement. Instead of enforcing international criminal law and delivering international criminal justice, the great powers of the world have been doing this. And when you speak to them about it, they do that. So the international community, so-called, is partly to blame. But, and I regret to say this, and you, Anna, are one of the exceptions, but the broad mass of the political and academic and intellectual establishment in Nicosia have gone along with this culture of appeasement. Far too many lawyers, academics, politicians, diplomats, and others have been doing this and have been trying to rationalize Turkish oppression. They've misused the word reconciliation. They've misused other concepts. They've shied away from discussing harsh truths. They've tried to smother realities with fancy phrases. I mean, we've even seen the Orwellian transformation of the political lexicon. The prospect of redivision has been characterized as reunification. I mean, that's the best example I can give you. So the local population cannot escape liability, and this is the great difference with Germany, because what we had in Germany after 1945 was the broad mass of the population, not all, but the broad mass of the population went along with the democratization and denazification process. They'd suffered so enormously at the hands of Nazi German oppression that they wanted to turn over a new leaf. In the Republic of Cyprus, so much suffering has been inflicted, and yet, I regret to say, a large mass of the population is just going along with the suffering and supporting political parties that are trying to kowtow to the agenda of Turkey. So I'm sorry to paint such a gloomy picture, but that is the regrettable reality. But it's also the reason why it's so important for people like you, people like me, and others to speak out, to exercise our democratic right, to hold those who are appeasing Turkey to account. And it's also important for people like your friend who wrote that play. It's also important for the artistic community to play its part. The best form of political criticism is satire, and a play is the best way of delivering satire.
Well,
can you just give us the name? Just give us the name of the play and the name of the playwright, just
yes.
So everyone can remember.
The playwright is Anthony Zachariadou. It was a play directed by Andreas Arauzos and Alpha Square, and the protagonist was Varnavas Kyriakides, who's a very well-known actor in Cyprus, and the play was featured in Strovolos Municipal Theatre because Archbishop Kyprianos was from Strovolos, and the whole thing was sponsored by Mitropolita Massou, Metropolitis Isaias. I don't think they're going to have any shows now, but I know in September they're planning to have some additional dates added to their itinerary. Plus, which I think is very hopeful, they are planning to invite schools to watch this play as part of their curriculum. So I think that's a really good initiative. Now we do have a few questions from the floor, so we may extend, I think, if that's okay with you, Klearchos, the ending of this discussion. We will give it a 15 or 20 more minutes. Would that be okay with you? Because we've got a few questions from the audience, and I'll try to summarize all the questions so that gives you time to respond to all of them. One of the questions is, of course, the obvious one. I mean, Archiepiscopos Kyprianos was a member of the Philiki Eteria, wasn't he? And my question to this would add, I mean, there was some kind of, let's say, justification for getting rid of the leaders of the Greeks, in the sense that there is evidence that they were giving money and gold and ammunition to Canaris, was in Cyprus, the famous Greek admiral. So they were involved in this uprising of the rest of Greeks. So there was some kind of justification there, wasn't there? So that's one question, if you want to address the historical understanding behind the decision of the Turks. Another question we have is, did the resistance of the Greeks of Cyprus continue after Kyprianos was murdered along with the other bishops? Then a question which I'm sure you'd like to answer is that, has Cyprus made an appeal, I think, to the Human Rights Commission like the Armenians are currently doing, and what would you think about doing that? And if I may add, I don't know, have you managed to jot down the questions yeah? Okay, so I can add a few more. A member of the audience is saying, I'm pleased you use the correct terminology of our ethnicity as citizens of the Republic of Cyprus. Many confuse the term Greek Cypriot as being an ethnicity, which is not. Can you give a brief historic background of our ethnicity? And I think that the question here is, how come from Greeks of Cyprus, as we referred by the British colonial rule, we would come to call ourselves Greek Cypriots? And the last question, I think we don't have any time to respond to any more. What do you think will happen on the 20th of July when Erdogan will be in Cyprus? What do you think he will be the announcements that he will make? And by allowing you to respond to these questions, which are quite a few, we will then close this discussion as soon as you're done with responding. Thank you to the audience, of course, for coming up with all these very useful comments and questions.
Thank you for the questions, and thank you, Anna, for putting them to me. The role performed by Archbishop Kyriakides and the other leading clergymen is something that cannot be overlooked. All sorts of allegations have been flung at the Archbishop and the bishops. Now, if the Ottoman Turkish state was a proper democracy, they would have charged the Archbishop and the bishops with various offences. They would have put them before a criminal court. The evidence would have been tested in court. The court would have delivered its judgment, and the judgment would have been subject to a possible appeal. And we would have had a historical record based around the court records in order to form a judgment as to whether or not the Archbishop did or did not do what he was alleged to have done. There was no trial. It was summary execution to all intents and purposes. This is how the Ottoman Turks operated. So whatever the role that the Archbishop and the bishops performed, they were the victims of a tyranny. And we'd have to call what the Ottoman state was by its name. We can't go around as what many academics have been doing over the decades and trying to paint a pleasant picture of something that ultimately was a tyranny. So yeah, there's no doubt that the Archbishop and the bishops clearly sympathized with the revolutionary movement in Greece. There's no doubt that there was support, discreet support, given by the population in Cyprus, or elements of the population in Cyprus, to the Greek cause. But if the Ottoman Turkish authorities felt that there was a case against the Archbishop and the bishops, they should have been put on trial, and they should have been given a fair trial before an independent judge, and an appropriate record built up and handed down so that we could scrutinize that record. So I'm very, very reluctant to heap any criticism on the Archbishop for what he did or didn't do. What I would want to emphasize is that we tend to focus in Cyprus on the method of execution and the suffering that was caused as a result of that execution. But the point I want to bring across to the audience is that the execution of the Archbishop and the bishops was preceded by a manifestly unfair process and the non-existence of any judicial proceeding.
Klearchos, before you move on, we've got again a technical problem.
Go ahead. It is a dialogue there.
Yeah, so we have to wait. If we can just wait for a couple of minutes, let's see if we can get this restored, because it's a shame to have you talk. And
yeah.
Okay, now you go ahead. Sorry about this, but I'm getting notifications that nobody's hearing what you're saying. So here you go again.
Thank you very much. I don't know when the line cut, but the point I was making was in relation to the Archbishop Kyriakides and his fellow judges. They were not subjected to a trial. We therefore do not have a historical or a judicial record of what he was officially charged with, and that's something we must never forget. We tend to focus on the death, the hanging, and in the case of the bishops, the beheadings, but we mustn't forget that what preceded those killings was a manifestly unfair process. That deals with the first of the questions that was put. As to the level of resistance after 1821, I'm not going to do anything here other than refer the audience to the website of the Cyprus government, which I'll refer to you again. It's gibros1821.gov.cy. There are a number of books that have been published in recent years on the Greek Revolution and its impact on Cyprus. What I'm going to hopefully do after this meeting is I'll send you a reading list with some articles that are freely available online, and some books that could be purchased for people to read up on the details. I mean, for what I do know is that in Cyprus there were a number of uprisings in the year, or minor uprisings in the grand scheme of things, in the years that followed the Greek Revolution, for example, in the 1830s, in 1833 in particular. But they were in a sense a consequence of the local conditions, or as much a consequence of the local conditions in Cyprus as a consequence of the Greek Revolution. The third point is, somebody asked a question as to whether the Armenian example should be followed. Well, my view is that the Republic of Cyprus took the right step in the immediate aftermath of the two Turkish invasions in 1974. We must never forget there were two. Again, the phraseology refers to the Turkish invasion in the singular. There were two invasions. There was one invasion launched on the 20th of July 1974 in response to the unquestionably illegal and criminal coup in Nicosia on the 15th of July 1974. But there was a second Turkish invasion on the 15th of August 1974, 3 weeks after the downfall of the illegal coupists regime in Nicosia, and 3 weeks after the downfall of its sponsor, the junta, the unelected junta in Athens. So the point I'm making is, in the aftermath of those two Turkish invasions, the government of the Republic of Cyprus reported Turkey to the Council of Europe, and the then European Commission of Human Rights conducted an investigation under the chairmanship of a distinguished British barrister called James Fawcett, the grandfather, interestingly enough, of Boris Johnson, the current British Prime Minister. And the European Commission on Human Rights completed a report adopted in 1976 that laid bare the scale of the mass inhumanity unleashed in the Republic of Cyprus. That report was followed by a number of court cases that the Republic of Cyprus brought against Turkey at the European Court of Human Rights. Those judgments were delivered in 2001 and 2014. They followed other European Court of Human Rights judgments in the case of Loizou, for example. What the Republic of Cyprus government has never done, insofar as I am aware, is try to bring Turkey before the International Court of Justice and to claim reparations and other remedies in response to what has been inflicted in the Republic of Cyprus. And what the Republic of Cyprus has equally failed to do is call for the creation of an independent war crimes tribunal, along the lines of the Nuremberg Tribunal for Germany, established in 1945, and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, established in The Hague in 1993. The Republic of Cyprus has decided to do nothing about international criminal justice and to do nothing about the delivery of that form of justice. And that, in my judgment, has been a catastrophic blunder, because it has enabled a culture of impunity to spread across the Eastern Mediterranean. And calling for the formation of an international criminal tribunal, I have to say here that justice is blind, and therefore everybody responsible for international criminality in the Republic of Cyprus should be subject to investigation, and that includes any citizen of the Republic of Cyprus of Greek background who is responsible for committing crimes against their Turkish fellow citizens, or should I say citizens of the Republic of Cyprus of Turkish background. That includes members of the Turkish armed forces who are still alive, who may be responsible or are allegedly responsible for committing crimes, international crimes in the Republic of Cyprus. That, for me, is a subject that is taboo, insofar as I can see. Nobody wants to touch it. It appears to be the case that many, dozens, possibly hundreds of women and girls were raped by Turkish armed forces in the aftermath of the two Turkish invasions. Indeed, the report I've just mentioned, chaired by Boris Johnson's grandfather, established that that was indeed the case, and that not only Turkish soldiers, but at least two Turkish officers were responsible for those rapes. So my view is what the Republic of Cyprus requires is a holistic approach to confronting the crimes and the inhumanities of the past. They mustn't just limit themselves to the human rights track. They have to adopt a much broader approach that possibly encompasses the International Court of Justice in The Hague and the creation of a new international criminal court. The issue of ethnicity is a big one. My personal view is that it is a matter for each individual to determine what is their ethnicity. It's not the job of the state or a constitution to come along and pin a label on you, say you're Greek Cypriot, you're Turkish Cypriot, you're something else. It's for each individual to decide who they are. In a democracy, in a free democracy, that, in my view, is absolutely essential. What has gone wrong in the Republic of Cyprus from the very beginning with the constitution established in 1960 is that the state, this is because of British and Turkish policy before 1960, the state has compelled each citizen to decide whether they belong to the Greek community or the Turkish community. Those are the phrases found in the constitution. The Greek community is defined with reference to Greek culture, Greek language, and membership of the Greek Orthodox Church. The Turkish community is defined with reference to Turkish culture, the Turkish language, and being a Muslim. So, where does, say, a citizen of the Republic of Cyprus of Armenian background fit in, or Latin background, or Maronite background, or Russian background, or Filipino background, or any other background? Well, the Constitution invites those people to decide which of the two communities they join. I mean, it's preposterous. So somebody of Armenian background is effectively forced by law to become a member of the Greek community and to be branded by the state Greek Cypriot. I mean, it's utterly mad. And yet the Constitution has been built around this form of segregation. There's no doubt that the majority of the population of the Republic of Cyprus is of Greek ethnicity if we define ethnicity with reference to language, culture, religion, and other related factors. There's no doubt about that. Greek heritage. One only has to go around the island of Cyprus to see the Greek temples and the Greek Orthodox churches that dominate, to see that it is, to all intents and purposes, an island with a Greek heritage. But as far as ethnicity is concerned, my view is it's for each individual citizen to determine their own ethnicity. It's not the job of the state to come along and impose an ethnicity on them. Having said that, the best forms of democracy are the ones that are nation states, where you have a nation that everyone can subscribe to, and that is indeed compatible with democracy. Democracy, this is important for Australia, I would stress, in spite of your federal framework there. Democracy rests upon the concept of one demos, one people, with multiple ethnicities, multiple religions, multiple backgrounds, all forming part of a single demos, with a single loyalty to the society, the democratic society that every single member of the demos forms part. What has gone catastrophically wrong in the Republic of Cyprus is that we built our constitution not on the basis of one demos or one people, but on the basis of two communities based around that Ottoman division of Muslims and non-Muslims. And as a result of that, where you have segregation, you have discrimination, you have separatism, you have tensions, friction, and sadly, intercommunal violence is lurking just around the corner. So that's a long answer to the question that the Greeks of Cyprus are unquestionably of Greek ethnicity, in my view, but it's for each individual person to determine what their ethnicity is. It's not my job or the state's job to pin labels on people. And as for President Erdogan's forthcoming illegal visit to the Turkish-occupied north of the Republic of Cyprus, well, it illustrates the culture of impunity that bedevils the Eastern Mediterranean. Let me just pause here. I have no idea what he's going to say. He's going to spew the usual. I suspect he's going to spew out the usual neo-Ottoman rhetoric that we become accustomed to. But let me just make a point here. Under the domestic criminal law of the Republic of Cyprus, it is a criminal offence for anybody to enter the Republic of Cyprus through an illegal port of entry. The so-called airports in the Turkish-occupied north of the Republic of Cyprus are illegal ports of entry. I asked the question, if President Erdogan is going to arrive in the Republic of Cyprus, albeit the occupied part of the Republic of Cyprus, through an illegal port of entry, will the government of the Republic of Cyprus call for his arrest? Will the law enforcement authorities of the Republic of Cyprus issue an arrest warrant? I think I'll stop there.
Okay, point made, Klearchos. So we've surpassed the allocated time by 20 minutes, but I think it was much needed because we had a few questions that had to be answered. And in any case, this is the whole point of having these webinars, is to engage in dialogue with other citizens or members of the diaspora who want to raise some points or pose some questions. And we did have technical problems, but we managed to resolve them. So on behalf of the Agora Dialogue Forum, and of course on behalf of the Cyprus Community of Canberra, who were co-organizers of this event, and I'd like to thank you, I'd like to thank the audience, and of course, I personally want to thank the organizers for inviting me to facilitate this discussion. It was an honor to spend Sunday morning both with Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides and the esteemed members of the audience. And before I go, I want to say again hello to Martha Mavromatis, our ambassador in Australia, who is doing an excellent job in promoting the interests of the Republic of Cyprus. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of the weekend, or whatever is left of it, if you're in Australia right now. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Goodbye from me too. Thank you.